how Trump learned to embrace the transgender culture wars. And what I find interesting about this is it was a path that I observed Trump following and traveling myself. So to see you kind of put it in chronological order and kind of make sense of it was really interesting. Mary Margaret, you call it the 2024 sleeper issue. Let's start there. Why do you think that the transgender culture war issue is the sleeper issue of this election?
Well, it's a sleeper issue because not everyone understands how massively impactful this issue is going to be. And I think the Trump team has tapped into it because they do get it and they understand, and their internal polling is showing them that, yes, Americans do deeply care about this issue. Kamala Harris and her campaign often talk about how this is something that Trump campaign is weaponizing, and it's just weaponizing fear, and Americans are more worried about the economy and things like that. Americans absolutely are worried about the economy, and they're worried about immigration, and I would say that those are the main issues that people are focused on. But this is, as we're arguing, the sleeper issue. American parents are tired of radical ideology being pushed on their kids. They don't want men and women's sports, and they don't want irreversible transgender procedures for kids. And Trump is picking up on this. He's paying attention to how this has been messaged. He's paying attention to how people are talking about it. And he's saying, okay, I'm going to lean into this. We're going to advertise on it. And so one of the first anecdotes we start out in this story with is this ad that the Trump campaign put out saying, Kamala is for they, them. The Trump campaign is for you. And this is their most effective ad, really interestingly, Andrew. And Democratic internal polling obtained by the New York Times actually validates that it's their most effective ad. So it's not just Republicans who are realizing how strong this is, Democrats are too.
Let's go ahead and play that ad, as a matter of fact. Cut 70.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
So
powerful
Mary
ad
Margaret,
there.
Yeah. So doing the research that you've done, maybe you could dissect what messaging tactics they're actually using inside that ad and what's proving effective.
Well, what they're doing is what Trump has done repeatedly is pointing out how crazy, and I'm not just using that word, I mean it in quotes, crazy these types of messaging are. It's crazy to say that illegal aliens should get taxpayer-funded transgender surgeries. No one who hears that thinks that's a good idea. But that is, in fact, what Kamala endorsed, and that is what she said she would support. Now, of course, recently she's been really careful about talking about this because even she realizes this is not resonating with voters. But all the Trump campaign had to do was to put that soundbite in an ad and say, look, this is what she supports. And I think it's been a boon to the Trump campaign because it's not something you really have to dive into. It's just there for everyone to see. This is absurd. And some of the more artfully contrived phrases that the left uses, like gender-affirming care, those things actually mean transgender surgeries, hormones, and puberty blockers for kids. And I think the Trump campaign has been really good about breaking that wall as well and showing people what they're actually talking about. So, you know, on the left, there's been a lot more recognition that these very radical left policies that people like Kamala Harris are pushing, maybe they need to tone down the rhetoric there because they're not actually popular with the American people. And polling shows that, and potentially, if Donald Trump wins next week, that win will demonstrate that as well.
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of truth to that, actually. I'll never forget, as a small aside, I deal with reporters for my day job when I'm not here. And I had a dinner with a New York Times reporter. And this individual goes back and forth between New York and Washington, D.C. It's about 2019. And he was telling me that if Republicans wanted to win, that we should run hard on the it's 2021, I apologize, 2021, that we should run hard on the transgender issue, because what he was seeing in New York and in DC was liberal Democrat families that were freaking out about this topic, absolutely freaking out about it. And I think, an underappreciated. So you've got the rural or the urban elites, the college educated urban core, but then you also have, I think, minorities, Mary Margaret, that are also impacted by this. And this is one of my favorite moments of this campaign. This is from Charlemagne the God Show, The Breakfast Club, reacting, I believe, to that very ad that you just highlighted in your report and we just played, saying how effective they thought it was. Play cut 72.
That ad they was running during the football games this weekend, claiming the vice president supports funding gender transition surgeries for all prison inmates and migrants in the U.S. That was nuts. I don't know if it was.
I wouldn't say nuts, but that was crazy.
That was funny.
I don't know if it was the backdrop of football, but when you hear the narrator say Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners, that one line, I was like, hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
I definitely see that she did.
That ad was effective.
That ad was effective.
They're right. They're right.
Is that supported in the data that this is really resonating with minority communities?
Yes, I've been seeing that. And really interestingly, Andrew, I've been hearing that this is the big issue that Trump can reach women on, which maybe that's not surprising to most people. It kind of surprised me because we know that Trump has an issue with female voters and Kamala Harris does not at all. That's one of her biggest support groups. But what a lot of people told me for this story is if you look at polling on it, it's reaching women very, very strongly. I think one pollster I talked to said that for women over 50, this is their top issue. That was according to the results that he was looking at from recently. He said for women under 50, it was their top secondary issue, which is fascinating to me, especially when, we hear that Trump on culture issues is driving women away. Well, that might just be on abortion, whereas transgender issues, it really could be something that they're drawn to him on. So that's really interesting on the one hand. But on the other hand, I think it's really important to highlight that Trump came to this issue because of the grassroots support from families who were pointing out all of these crazy things. Like you were saying, that reporter that you were talking to, I find that anecdote really interesting because, in liberal New York, I'm surprised to hear that, but maybe we shouldn't be, considering how many parents all over the country were furious at what they found out their kids were being exposed to during COVID. The radical gender ideology, critical race theory, pornographic books, all of this. And across the country, parents rose up, maybe in Loudoun County, first of all, but then in all across the country to say, we are not going to put up with this. And Glenn Youngkin's victory in Virginia was a really good example of how that kind of thing can get a Republican elected. He listened to parents. He voiced their concerns. He said, I will not let people like Terry McAuliffe tell you that you don't have a say in your kid's education. And he won. And I think that was a real turning point for this issue, because that was around the time when a lot of Republicans started talking about this topic more and more. And I think it was around the time when conservative newsrooms started really leaning into this issue. And as a conservative journalist, I'd like to just give us a little hype here. We all worked really hard on education stories. And I think that's part of the reason that the GOP and Trump himself has been so bolstered and strong in their rhetoric on this topic, because they had the stories to lean back on and say, no, this is not a conspiracy theory. We know it happened. This person verified all of the details. This mother shared this story. These documents came from this school. They had everything to fall back on. And they couldn't have done that without grassroots activists and parents and conservative media.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're making that point, and it was well made in the piece, by the way. And you talk about the rise of conservative activists in this space, like Riley Gaines, who we have a partnership on the Turning Point USA side. She's one of our contributors. As a matter of fact, you linked to a clip of her from one of our recent events. Go ahead and play cut 71.
I see on social media people saying they're voting for Kamala Harris because she's a woman. Well, guess what? I am voting for Donald J. Trump because I am a woman.
But I love that. I love that we just let it breathe too, right there. Because the audience, you could just feel it was such a palpable moment. I was in the audience that day when she said it, and I remember getting chills because of just how powerful it was being there live in person, hearing that, and then seeing the crowd response.